Hello YouTube. Recently I made a video on Atmora, the now completely frozen over our supposed homeland of most human races of Tamriel. That video I felt really good about, all the way up until a few days ago when a commenter on this channel named Neasper attended me of the fact that the Elder Scrolls Online's new chapter, Gold Road, which released less than a week ago, added quite a new groundbreaking piece of lore on why Atmora ended up with such a frozen doom. So, acknowledging the running curse of Bethesda adding new lore just after I made a video, let's run the intro and talk about some of the new lore for Atmora's freezing, and some corrections of the older video. So in the new chapter there's a book called The Ship of Ice, which contains an old Nord folktale, told from the perspective of someone who tells a story from the time of his grandfather's grandfathers. That story retells the famous last migration from Atmora to Tamriel, where a ship filled with corpses and starved, barely alive Atmorans made port near Winterhold, begging the locals to take them in, as Atmora had finally succumbed to its mysterious climate shift called the Frostfall, which made the continent unlivable and unfit for human life, leaving all those who remained dead, now in a frozen wasteland. Now, the book describes how the Jarl of Winterhold hailed these refugees and allowed them into Winterhold, providing them food, warmth and shelter that they asked for, and the refugees then tell the Jarl that they were the last living Atmorans who fled the now eternal winter on the continent, as they tell the Jarl that there are no more summers on Atmora. Now, this is where the story gets extremely interesting, because according to this tale, the refugees told the Jarl of Winterhold, and I quote, "The day we made ready to sail, a snow elf came to us, a child dressed in a thin gown, though we shivered in our heaviest furs. She said to us, 'I bring you a message. With your swords and axes you slew our homeland. With the frostfall we have now slain yours. Look upon these frozen shores for the last time and know that this is the harvest that your fathers sowed and their fathers before them.' She then vanished." Now, this heavily implies that Atmora was frozen due to snow elf intervention and revenge for how the Nords basically took down their entire population, save for those who took refuge with the Dwemer, which later became the Falmer that we know in Skyrim, and the others that survived were basically those who hid themselves, like those in the Chantry of Ariel or the Forgotten Vale as we know it from Skyrim. Now, it's worth noting here that I covered the entire story of the fall of the Snow Elves in my video on Atmora and Ysgramor, so watch that if you're not fully up to date on that. However, I just want to say that I'm highly skeptical of this tale, and I think it's mostly just suffering from unreliable narrator problems, as many tales are in the Elder Scrolls universe. And before the Elder Scrolls Online isn't canon crowd starts banging their keyboards, all Elder Scrolls Online lore, whether we like it or not, is greenlit by Bethesda Game Studios' writing team, and some Elder Scrolls Online lore has even been featured in the Elder Scrolls Blades, which was made by Bethesda Game Studios, you know, the makers of the main series. So they see it as canon, so I figured out a very long time ago that it's silly to resist it at this point. Anyway, to return to the story, I am skeptical about Snow Elf involvement in the freezing of Atmora, because while yes, weather magic exists on Tamriel, as we've covered many times before, and the Snow Elves were proficient in magic, I feel like this story is not really more than Nord legend, because for one, it's written from the perspective of someone who tells an ancient story or an ancient legend from their grandfather's grandfather's time. And even in the story itself, at the end, it describes how some Nords were skeptical of this story at the time. And I quote, "If they had such dire magic, then why had they not used it to defeat Ysgramor and save their realms in Skyrim?" In addition, we have some hints in previous lore that around the time of Ysgramor, Atmora was already slowly beginning to cool down, and he and his men likely lived around somewhere 800 to 500 years before the start of the First Era, and this final migration of corpses and starved Atmorans took place around the year 68 of the First Era. So at the very least, more than 500 years after the massacre of the Snow Elves began, the continent was eventually unlivable and the last people migrated to Tamriel. So, to think that by that time there would be Snow Elves who somehow traveled to Atmora and froze it over through magical means seems quite unlikely to me. But not impossible, of course. It's very possible that at the time of Ysgramor, when the cooldown apparently began, it was the Snow Elves, or at least Snow Elf mages, who set in motion a long-term chain reaction leading to the Ice Age that the continent is experiencing. Very possible. But I think it's far more likely that this story is a fabricated one by the Nords who would blame their ancient enemy for something that they likely never had anything to do with. As I speculated in my original Atmora video, it's also very possible, for example, that it was the Atmorans themselves who caused the freezing of the continent. After all, they had very powerful dragon shout or Thu'um magic at their disposal, and they were known to be basically almost in perpetual civil war on the continent. So the freezing may have been a result of some magical accident, or perhaps it was just regular climate change. I don't think we'll ever learn the truth of the matter, unfortunately, but the fact that they gave us some lore and new legends, which, even if these legends are unreliable, could point to a grain of truth, and I think that's really cool. That being said, the newly added lore in the Gold Road chapter gave us even more lore on Atmora. For one, we got final confirmation that no, they weren't illiterate, as next to the dragon script they seem to have had their own runic writing system. So no, Ysgramor did not invent writing for the Nords, that may have been propaganda. Although the runes that they used are described as quite incomprehensible and really vague, so it's possible that Ysgramor simplified the runes for everyday use or invented a new runic system more in line with the systems of Tamriel, making interaction with the other races easier. That's very possible, so perhaps that's the reason that he is accredited with inventing writing. We also learned that on Atmora, not all people worship the dragons as their principal deities. There were different religious cults on Atmora. While each Atmoran cult worshipped animals as totems of the gods, they all seem to have had different principal animals. The dragon cult, by far the biggest religious cult, of course worshipped the dragons as the most important animal. But there was also a moth cult, a serpent cult, and apparently a small goat cult, which was born out of the sighting of a walking and talking goat that people apparently spotted in the woods. Which makes me think that perhaps a faun, creatures that we know exist in the Elder Scrolls lore, and which we encountered in previous chapters, somehow made it to Atmora. Although this might have also been a translation issue, as the writer admits that the text is extremely difficult to translate. And that's basically all the new lore on Atmora that was added by the Gold Road chapter. Usually I don't make updates to existing videos, I either remaster them if it's been a really long time, or add corrections to the top comment, but this was such a big potential revelation that it required its own video. Plus, there were more than just one corrections with the new lore that we got, so I hope you enjoyed this extra little video, and that I managed to teach you something new about the Elder Scrolls lore today. Before I end this, quick thank you to Bethesda Netherlands for providing me with a code for the new Gold Road chapter. Could not have made this video without that. Now, all that remains for me to be done is to thank my top Patreon subscribers, Mr. Bernardo Binda, His Soul, Gabriel Binda, Athena Yodis, Doji, Fenrir, King Chris, Pavel T, Pentam Gwar, Volkir of Argonia, Leo Worley, and Sword of Bushido. They and all the others on screen keep this channel alive, and for that I'm eternally grateful. That said, I will see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.